It's ironic that we took electronic process and applied the physical limitations to it to the electronic world. So let me explain that. For instance, if we have a file that belongs in more than one file folder in the physical world, what do? You make a duplicate copy, put the file in both vanilla folders, or we create a third folder that says folder 1 and 2, and we have another folder. Highly ineffective, right? But we've carried that same exact concept into the digital world, and that's how we organize digital files. It's time to change. That's not the effective way. So, and you and all of us already have this functionality available to us within SharePoint. So in this example, here's that same list of documents in a SharePoint document library. And instead of using folders, I'm tagging content, right? So I upload a brochure. It's tagged as a template. It was created by me. The faculty member is Kip. The document owner is Kip. And it's assigned to the employee engagement department. Is it in a folder? No. Can I update the brochure and actually have it belong to multiple categories? Yes, I can tag it every which way, right? And what this functionality allows me to do is, one, I can filter based upon these columns. I can actually turn on filtering and actually filter down the content that says, I only want to see documents that have been classified as a template or that are also a Word document and where the author is Kip, right? And then even despite all of that, I can actually search against it. And that metadata is going to help me get to these documents and I can curate. Now, this is one little silo, right? In the grand scheme of knowledge, this is the HR bucket. And then the other department can do the same thing. But what's even more powerful is when those tags transcend those collaborative silos. And now we have a taxonomy that represents the organization. And now I can search across the entire enterprise and say, give me a template that's a Word document that was the author by Kip. And it's going to find with that criteria across the entire Office 365 ecosystem. That is when this starts becoming very, very powerful. Now, if this is so powerful, why do we need SharePoint Syntax? Ultimately, we need syntax because of the good old story of no one ever fills that taxonomy. So I'll give you an example. I worked with a client in New York, and this is back in my early days where I believed and I felt that as an organization, we should have this grand taxonomy plan. We should build our taxonomy and figure out how we're going to tag all these different documents every which way. We'll implement it and we'll give it over to the users and they're going to follow the adoption policy. They're going to upload documents and tag the hell out of everything and everything's going to be great. The reality of it is, what happened? Right? We ask a user to enter 10 different fields when they upload a document. Does the user do that? No, they don't. They only fill in half the data. Or it's too cumbersome, so they don't even use the system, right? It's the issue that we've always had with tagging of content. And that is where SharePoint Syntax comes into play, okay? So what is SharePoint Syntax? Ultimately, it's the first release product, right, from the project Cortex. And it uses advanced AI machine teaching to automate content processing and transform that content within that document into knowledge. And we do that through training of what we call models, right? And so if we had to break SharePoint Syntax into kind of 3 buckets, it's this. It does content understanding, it processes that content, and then we can do something with it. Now, in this little slide, I'm saying we can apply compliance configs, but we can do even much more with it, and I'll talk through that, okay? Now, the modeling part of SharePoint Syntax, like the how do we get the AI to understand the document, is really one of 2 different ways. We have a document understanding model, which extracts unstructured content from a document, or we have the form processing model, which is for more structured documents. So think of the prime example of like a form processing model would be for invoices or expense sheets or, you know, consistent forms where we know the layout is going to be very particular and exact. Where document understanding models might be an agreement or a statement of work or an RFP or, you know, something else like that's kind of broad, a lot of content, and we have to jump in there and extract data from it. Okay. And those are the models that we'll talk about. So in layman terms, what SharePoint Syntax does is it will ultimately grab content from a document and populate that metadata that I was telling you about. Okay, so let's see it in action. I'll first walk through what this looks like from an end user's perspective, and then we'll talk about the back end, about how this is configured and what that looks like specifically. Okay. And let me make sure the chat is up. So really quick, we're going to use the chat, or we can use the chat if you have questions. So don't chatter in there, because I don't want to lose the questions with a bunch of other chatter, but feel free, if there's certain key things that you want to see or you have questions around, jump in the chat, put your questions in, and hopefully we'll get to those efficiently as part of this call. Okay. All right. So let's look at the lay of the land of this particular document library. Let me find my mouse here. Okay. So here's a document library with licensing. Great point, Mike, and we'll get to that. And if not, unmute yourself and yell at me before the call is over, just in case I don't cover licensing. Okay. So, all right. So here's the library, and we have deployed a model to this library. So let's look at what the user experience is like. So as you can see, I have 3 documents that have some metadata populated, and I have 2 documents where no metadata is populated. And I'll explain what is happening here. But let's first show you that this is actually working and I'm not smoking anything. So I'm going to choose to upload a file, and I'm going to choose this Contoso HR benefits number 8. Okay. Good. 8's not already in there. And you can see 8 comes in. Now, look, tooltip right here. We are analyzing your file. One or more of the columns will be updated with discovered values. Okay, so that file is being processed. The other thing that we'll notice is on the document library title, I have this little tooltip that says that this library can classify documents for you. Gives a summary, letting you know that this is a classification document library. I can view the active models by clicking on that link that have been applied to this document library. So I have a model called Benefits Change Notice. Here's the description. Here's when it was published. And then we can also see if there's a retention label associated with that model. And I'll explain that here shortly. Okay, so there's the model details. The other things that we'll notice as number 8 gets processed here is, tell me, why does these have no content and these ones do? And that is the first step in the content process. The first step in the content process is to determine, in this example, is this document a benefits change notice? So I could upload any random document, and if it doesn't meet the criteria, it won't be flagged as a benefits change notice. It'll just be a standard document. Okay. Once Syntax identifies the type of document it is, then it runs extractors. So this addressee is an extraction of data from the document. The discount percentage is extracted. Obviously, the date changed is. And then the confidence level is the confidence of the modeling. So the modeling feels that it's 99.3084% accurate in regards to how it has classified the document and what it has extracted from the document. Now, I think this is really, really important, and let me tell you why. So imagine an environment where we have maybe the variation of the documents that we want to do content processing against. Maybe they're drastic. They're really drastic. And we just don't have the confidence level that if we upload a document that we can trust all the data always. So what we could do is use this data to our advantage. For instance, if the confidence score is below, let's say 95%, we kick off a flow in Power Automate and we notify the appropriate individual saying, hey, this benefits change needs a manual review, right? Something wasn't just right. The AI builder and the form processing didn't feel like it was confident enough in its extraction. And so it requires a hand touch. And what's great about that is, one, we can ensure accuracy of data through that little business process there. But the other thing is, then we can learn and we can go back into the model and go, oh, geez, you know what? Why didn't this model pick it up? And then we can train the model even more. So that way we help mitigate that risk of that confidence level being below a certain level, right? So that confidence score could be really, really valuable. And then the classification date is obviously the date in which it was last classified. Okay. So Scott Rice, he asked a question, can Syntax work with scanned images? It can. In fact, now it's the other model though, right? So that's a form processing model versus an unstructured document. But yes, it can work with images. That's coming soon, not right now, but that's coming soon, and that's in the playbook. Now, and by the way, everything I'm about to talk about regarding SharePoint and Syntax, most of the releases, according to Microsoft, will be released end of this year and early next year. So we're not talking, almost everything I talk about, we're looking at a release before mid next year. So these are all coming really, really quick, okay? That's a long question. I'm going to read that in a second. All right. Classification date is when it gets processed. Now, the other thing that it automatically did is once a document got classified, a view got added in this document library that is related to those types of documents. That automatically happened. I didn't create that. And I can navigate between all documents, right? The standard document view. And then I can navigate into the new view that got curated or created. Okay. And our 8 is still processing. It's going to make me look bad by taking too much time here. So we'll come back to it. Promise it's going to get processed here in a second. The other thing, let me point this out too, is I can kick off a manual process. So I can come up here and reclassify. So I can even choose documents that were already classified before and classify and extract. And you'll see that up here in this menu. So if I click on classify and extract, it's going to process that again. And hopefully we'll get to a point here. In fact, maybe I should just refresh my browser and maybe it has been classified. And it has. Okay, so here's 8. It got classified as a benefits change notice. Jolene Parks got extracted from the document. Discount 10. Here's the date. And it was 99.3085% classified. And of course, the time in which it was classified. Okay. And then we'll talk about what that looks like specifically. All right. Let me look at these quick questions. See if any of these are. Oh, it wasn't a long question. It was Brent giving your answer to licensing. So take a look at the licensing, Mike, in the chat. So can Syntax be an option for our Q1 project to migrate our current on-prem SharePoint to O365? Yeah, for sure. It could be part of the migration process. And what's really interesting when we think about this is imagine us putting the models and the content classifiers in place before we migrate. So the data is automatically classified, right? This starts getting like really, really powerful. And this is going to just get better as I dive into this even more. So hang with me. We're going to keep talking through this. Okay. So, let's see, I have uploaded columns, taxonomy views. Okay. The other thing I wanted to point out is these, for the nerdy techie guys on the call, this column benefit change notice is a content type. So that's a content type that got created in the content type hub based upon the model. So one could almost come to a conclusion that a model qualifier is the equivalent of a content type, or it's a content type on steroids or whatever, right? And so kind of keep that in mind. The other thing is that these columns can be associated with a taxonomy from the managed metadata service. And I'll explain that a little bit further as we jump into kind of the admin center after we cover the syntax portion of admin. Okay. So, all right, let's jump into how did this all happen in this cute little demo that we threw together here. So a site got provisioned. We created a site called, let me back up because I don't. So we created a site called an admin content center. And within the admin content center, we can create models. So in this example, I have 2 different models. I have a model for expense reports and another model for the benefits change note. Okay. I hit create model and you give it a name. That's how simple it is to start off with. Once we're in the model, the first thing that we need to do is we need example files. And this is what the artificial intelligence does. Learning requires to be able to increase its accuracy of content processing. So in this example, I uploaded a handful of documents, these documents that are good examples of a benefit change request. These examples are examples of a non-benefit change request. And the model wants both. It wants to be able to see what a change request should look like and what a bunch of documents that are not change requests look like. So it knows how to classify them appropriately. Okay. So once we have the sample files in the ecosystem, then we want to train the classifier. Okay. So in this example, and it's super, super basic, like it's actually kind of funny how basic it is. So in here, I'd come here, I select a file, it loads the content onto the right-hand side. And literally I come up here and I say, is this an example of a benefit change notice? And I click yes, next file, yes, next file, yes. And then I find a couple of no's, choose negative. And then once it loads here, I'll put no, not a good example. And I could do that some more, right? So I can qualify this model a little bit more. I can hit yes on this one, give it some more examples. And this might be a good example of our model's not 100%, right? It's not ideal. It's missing some stuff. So we're going to upload some other examples to help it learn. And in this one, that's a bad example. So I'm going to hit negative. And now we've trained it how to recognize a benefit change order versus something else. Okay. The next part is this around the training. So in this example, we have a document and there's key things that we want to extract. And these are the explanations around those extractions. So we can look for keywords within the document. And then if I hit train model, it'll process these explanations and confirm if it passes, right? So if I just hit train model right here, oh, I got an error. Looks like a weird error. Well, there you go. Now it's working. So right now it just processed through these and it's like, okay, yeah, that looks good. It passed, it's passed. And it shows me all the documents that match, including the negatives. Like, hey, this is a negative that matches. Okay. Really basic. Okay. Now, if I go back to the model page, then we can start talking about extractors. And extractors are the buckets of data that we want to extract from the formalized document. And if I hit extractor, I could just choose a name, hit create, and obviously it doesn't do anything. It just creates an entity, right? Now, once the entity is created, I do the same thing. I say, okay, here's the document. Let's train it. So here's an example of an extractor for the addressee. And all that we did here is we entered an explanation where we look for the word dear as a prefix, and then we highlight the content in which we extract. And then we continue this process for our sample files. And we keep doing it. And as you can see, the trained files below predict who the individual is as the addressee. And we can see in this cute little training, box down here on the right, that it's accurate. Now, there's other things that we could do. For instance, we could add another explanation that the addressee always has a comma behind it, right? And so now both of those explanations need to be met for it to be accurate. Okay. So now it's interesting is in some cases, when you run these models, you'll find out like if someone has a really long name or they have a middle name, it'll grab the first name and the middle name and then it'll stop. So in that example, adding an explanation for the comma would probably very much make sense. Okay. And then once again, we go through this, we train the model, we can test, we can validate, and it looks good, right? Let me show you another extraction here. So here's the discount percentage. So we're looking for the letter right, or A. Then we're looking for percent that's after it. And then we're checking the proximity or the amount of spacing between an and a percent. And that's the data in which we're extracting from this document for the discount percentage. Okay. Pretty straightforward. And then once we get those in place, we have a working model. Now, here's the cool part. One, I could take this model and I could download it. And I could create multiple admin centers within a 365 tenant. And I could download this model and move it over to another content admin center. Not only just that, for you guys that have maybe test tenants or sandbox tenants, we can actually download a model from one tenant and upload it to another tenant. So these models can be moved around. Okay. Now, how do we